Void Miner, Ashes of Helix, Prelude, The Leak. Merrick Jellin sat hunched in the stale backroom of Vandalis Station, the flickering glow of a battered terminal his only light. The air was thick with recycled cold and the faint, bitter tang of burnt circuitry. Around him, crates stacked like forgotten tombstone smelled of machine oil and old dust, pressing in like the weight of 1,000 lost years. Outside the station's relentless hum vibrated through the metal walls, a grinding, endless reminder of lives trapped in the void between worlds. Dock workers shuffled past, their boots clanking on steel grates, voices low and tense. Somewhere far off, a child cried. A warning siren faded into silence. Merrick's eyes flicked over the scrolling data on his screen, routine at first. Freighter manifests, chatter from the outer rings, security logs. Then the buried packet surfaced, flagged by the station's fragile surveillance net. He hesitated, fingers trembling slightly before opening it. The list spilled out onto the screen in cold, jagged columns. Names, hundreds, miners, traders, engineers, even station clerks. Each name marked with a cold precision. Collaborator, sympathizer, traitor. Merrick's throat tightened. These weren't just words. They were verdicts. He scanned quickly, heart pounding, recognizing some faces, old friends, men who'd shared meals with him in the smoke-filled bars of the Belt's elder stations. Others were ghosts, lost to asteroid strikes or forgotten disputes, all branded with the same black mark. He cross-checked names with the station roster. Some still worked the crowded docks, loading freighters under the flickering lights. Others had long since disappeared into the Belt's unforgiving expanse, all marked guilty by accusation. A sudden sharp knock shattered the fragile silence. Merrick spun around as a figure slipped inside. A woman, lean and sharp-eyed, her face shadowed beneath a worn hood, the faint stench of machine grease clinging to her coat. "Merrick," she whispered, low and urgent. "Did you find it?" He swallowed real hard. "Yes, the list is real." Her gaze sharpened, lips thinning. "If this gets out—" "It already has," Merrick said, voice grim. "The leak's spreading, quietly but unstoppable. The Belt is about to tear itself apart." The woman's jaw clenched. "Did we make sure it's the last spark?" Merrick's hands hovered above the keyboard, dread settling deep in his gut like cold stone. The weight of what they held wasn't just data. It was a fuse lighting a powder keg. Around them, the station's life pulsed on, unaware and oblivious to the storm about to break. Somewhere in the crowd, old alliances would shatter and new enemies would be born. Merrick stared back at the names, each one a promise of blood and betrayal. The fragile unity of the Belt was already fracturing, and he was holding the match. Chapter 1. One-Man Ops. Arg Arsten adjusted the attitude thrusters manually, something no one bothered doing anymore. The computer could handle it fine, but Arg had never trusted full automation. Pilots who turned over control too often didn't last long in the Belt. The Void had a way of humbling machines, especially old ones. The Dust Widow banked slowly into position. Her hull groaned softly as she settled into a stable drift alongside the asteroid. She was old, older than most ships still flying out here, and she sounded it, but she was solid. Heavy armor on the outer belly, double-thick comm shielding on the bridge, radiation cladding where it counted. Every weld in her skin had been done by a tired hand, sometimes his. Arg watched the asteroid turn lazily in the distance, a knuckled, tumorous thing, iron-heavy and veined with a faint glint of exposed nickel. It didn't have a name. Most of them didn't anymore. There were too many, and people had stopped pretending rocks needed baptizing. Now they were just registry tags and drill coordinates. He flipped a few switches on the left panel, bringing the sensors online. A flicker of the static rolled through the display, then cleared to show the composition scan. 68% iron, 13% nickel, 4% traces, enough to make it worth cutting. Arg leaned back, took a breath, and then reached for the recording toggle on the console. The tiny red light clicked on. Log entry, one-man ops. Run number 1273. Target rock. Belt 142 TAC K. Solid read on iron content. Looks like a clean cut. No drift, no interference. Quiet out here. He paused for a beat, letting the silence speak for him. Been quiet for a while now. His voice, low and rough from disuse, echoed softly back from the bridge bulkheads. He rubbed at his temple with a grease-streaked thumb. The widow's cabin was dim, half lit by the bluish glow of monitors and the faint green of life support readout. Every sound was familiar, comforting. Outside, nothing moved but rock. Arg let the moment sit. The one-man ops segment was the only part of his channel people still tuned into, as far as he could tell. Not for the mining. Nobody cared about that anymore. But for the voice of a man alone, working against the stars. Out here, solitude sold. He leaned forward and continued, tone steady. Station prices have dropped again. Vandalist is offering 43 creds a unit for processed ore. Might hold, might not. I'll take what I can get. Widow's life support patch held from the last leak. That's 2 runs in a row without a failure. We're ahead. A faint beep interrupted him. The console chimed. A delayed data ping arriving through the long-range relay, bouncing off a series of buoys scattered between Jupiter and the outer rings. Arg frowned and flipped the comm switch. The feed was fragmented. Partial packets. Text mostly. He scrolled slowly. Station-wide security alert. Violent disturbance in Cargo Sector 2. Vandalist Station. Confirmed fatalities following dispute over alleged collaborator list. Names released include multiple active personnel. Unconfirmed reports of sabotage. List circulating via unsecured channels. Arg blinked slowly. He read it again. Collaborator list? He said aloud, as if testing the shape of the words in his mouth. They're still chasing ghosts. His hand hovered over the comms panel for a long moment. The line crackled. No audio yet, just fragments of transcripts and incomplete local station logs. Then, at last, a shaky voice came through. Recorded some overtaxed broadcast on the outer rings. I'm telling you, he was a good man. Ran cargo for 3 years without a single dispute. They strung him up over nothing but a name on a list. Said the list was real. Said he sold fuel to Helix back before the fall. Who didn't? Arg's shoulders sagged slightly as he leaned into his seat. Helix. Even dead, the corporation was still casting shadows. He stared at the monitors. His own face looked back at him in the reflection. Hollow-eyed, unshaved, older than he remembered. The scars above his brow itched when the ship cooled, and it was itching now. He clicked the recorder back on. Update. Incoming chatter from the Vandalist relay. Some kind of list circulating. People getting killed. Rumors of old Helix sympathizers. Might be truth to it, might be nothing. Either way, it's belt wide now. Nobody's going to stay quiet for long. He hesitated, then lowered his voice. If this turns into another purge, we're in for something worse than lean credits and broken air scrubbers. The channel light stayed red, recording his words. The belt runs on trust, not laws, not credits. Trust. That list breaks that. Doesn't matter if it's true. Doesn't matter if it's lies. The moment people start checking names before they shake hands, we're done. A sharp knock sounded through the hull. A mechanical report. The cutting arm was ready. He glanced at the asteroid again, still hanging in its slow roll. Work waited, but something nodded him. He turned the recorder off, sat back, let the silence stretch. Arg didn't believe in ghosts, not the kind that drifted through cabins or whispered in the dark. But Helix? They left behind ghosts of another kind, buried in code, burned into networks, wrapped around people's names like a noose. And now, It looked like someone had decided to pull it tight. He reached into the storage cubby and pulled out a dented tin mug. The coffee was bitter and lukewarm. He drank it anyway. Outside, the void watched quietly. The widow hummed, and far across the belt, a storm was beginning. Arg shut down the comms relay and slid the monitor arm back into its housing. The words lingered in his head. Collaborator list. Unrest. Confirmed fatalities. But he had pushed them aside. He had a word to cut. Trouble on Vandalis wasn't his trouble. Not anymore. He played his part in the wars, in the blockades, in the long fall of Helix. He'd bled for stations that didn't remember his name, carried cargo for unions that collapsed before payment cleared. And when the dust settled, all he had left was this ship, this hull, and the space between rocks. He watched the asteroid turn lazily in the distance. No name, just a registry tag. 142 TAC K, marked decades ago by some survey drone that probably didn't exist anymore. Out here, names were a luxury. Rocks got numbers, and no one cared to remember them twice. Arg flicked on the targeting reticle and locked the anchor harpoons. The widow shook gently as the clamps fired, thudding deep into the asteroid's surface with mechanical precision. The rig kicked to life with a hollow growl. He hit record again. "1-man ops, part 2, he said quietly. "Comm interference is cleared. Drill is live, making entry cuts on grid sector Alpha. Projected yield, 11 metric tons, unrefined." Outside the viewport, sparks blossomed where the plasma bit into rock. Small, bright flares against the dark. He watched them silently for a while, hand resting on the throttle, not thinking about the list, not thinking about Helix. Just work. That was the trick to staying sane out here. Work, routine, quiet. A rhythm of survival that dulled the noise. But the back of his mind itched. Something in the relay chatter hadn't sounded right. Not just the panic. Arg had heard plenty of that before. No, it was something colder, measured. Like the leak wasn't a leak at all. Like it was a choice. Who benefits from a list like that, he thought? Who stirs the belt just when things start to settle? He shook the thought off. Not his problem. The drill was halfway through with its cut when a soft alarm blinked on the environmental panel. Oxygen scrubber fluctuation, barely above threshold, not urgent yet. He stood, stretched, and moved towards the back of the cockpit. The gravity was weak, compensators operating at half standard, but he didn't mind. Let his knees rest a bit. He slid open the service panel and peered inside. The filter membrane had started to blacken from trace dust, probably from the last patch job in Bay 4. Nothing serious. He marked it for replacement next run, resealed the panel, and returned to the pilot's chair. Back to routine. Back to quiet. He let the recorder roll a few more minutes, then shut it off. The 1-man ops segment wouldn't get many views. Not now. Not with half the belt chasing ghosts and grudges. But someone would watch it. Someone always did. Probably another loner a few thousand kilometers away, chewing on the same doubts. He slit the last of the bitter coffee and watched the drill finish its pass. Clean cut. Full ore exposure. The Dust Widow held her position without a shudder. Arg leaned back, hands folded behind his head, and stared out at the dark. The belt stretched on in every direction, vast and empty. For a moment, he could almost believe the chaos was far away, fading, irrelevant. But the red line on the comms relay blinked again. He didn't move. Not yet. Chapter 2. Burn Line. Kara Voland stood behind the sealed blast doors of Processing Deck 4, arms crossed tight against her chest. Breath fogging in the thinning air, the emergency lights flickered across the curved steel wall, casting long, stuttering shadows across the corridor. Somewhere down the hall, someone was pounding on a bulkhead, shouting names that hadn't meant anything to her yesterday. They meant everything now. The collaborator list had reached Drosen Station less than 30 hours ago. It came in over an unsecured nav packet, disguised in system update code. Someone wanted it to spread, and it had. Faster than any security team could contain it. The data had ripped through the local networks like a blade through a pressure seal. Names spilled across every screen, slate by slate, comm by comm. It infected the station like a sickness. Rumors became accusations. Accusations turned into action. It started with a technician tossed out of the machine shop mid-shift. Then someone hacked the station's central feed, broadcasting the list on a loop through the mess halls. Within 6 hours, 3 people were dead, 2 thrown from a lift shaft, 1 found strangled near the water reclamation plant. All because their names had been on a list. Kara hadn't seen hers. Not yet. She pressed her fingers to the cold panel beside the door. Checked the seal status. Still green. Still holding. "Control," she said into the wrist mic. "Volan here. I'm secured deck 4. No breach check." Static. Then a voice. Crackling. Thin. Exhausted. "This is Control. Stay locked down. Admin wing is compromised. We've lost command function." Kara stared at the wall, jaw clenched. "I need to know where the crew chief is." "The last seen near core maintenance. He's not responding to channel." She closed her eyes. Nico was probably gone. Or worse, half alive, pulled into some hallway tribunal by people he once trained. Loyalty didn't matter anymore. The list rewrote every bond. She looked over her shoulder. 6 others shared the space behind that blast door with her. A mechanic, 2 runners, a quartermaster, a pair of logistics cadets barely out of their teens. None of them talked. One of the runners, Jace, held a pry bar like a weapon. His hands were shaking. The list had done its job. It didn't need to be true. It only needed to be believed. Someone outside screamed. Metal rang against metal. Kara flinched, her heart slamming once hard in her chest. "They're getting closer," said the older mechanic, voice dry as grit. Kara nodded. "We hold here. No one opens that door." "Even if they're clean?" one of the cadets asked, eyes wide. "Especially if they're clean," Kara said. "That's how this works now. They make you prove what you're not." The silence that followed was heavier than gravity. She slid down the wall and sat on the cold deck plating, arms resting over her knees. She'd spent 12 years in the belt, worked 5 stations, saw Helix rise and fall like a wave across the void. But she'd never seen anything like this. Not when Helix cut power to half the outer rim to force a vote. Not when Vandalus burned during the refinery blockade. Not when they found that scout frigate full of corpses near Ceres. This was worse, because it wasn't coming from the outside. It was inside, boring through the skin of every station, every ship, every crew. The scream outside turned into a choking cough, then silence again. Kara pressed her eyes shut. When she opened them, she whispered to no one. "This isn't a storm." She didn't know where the words came from. Maybe they weren't hers, but they rang true. This wasn't the storm. This was the wind before it. Chapter 3. Static Between Stars. Arg Arsten woke in the dark. The hum of the ship was steady, familiar. Somewhere beneath the deck plating, the circulation pumps wheezed against their age. Tired lungs fighting to keep stale air moving. That sound had once put him at ease. Now it just reminded him how long he'd been out here alone. He sat up on the narrow cot, welded into the bulkhead wall, joints popping in the cold. The thermal blanket slid off his shoulders in a crumple of static-charged fabric. The chill in the cabin bit through the sleeves of his thermal jacket. Frugal heating, standard practice, he told himself. Through the solitude made it feel more like punishment. The Dust Widow hadn't moved in hours. She was holding position on a slow drift beside Registry Rock 142 TAC K. No name, just numbers. A carbon-heavy lump tumbling lazily across a sector no one bothered patrolling anymore. The ore content was decent, but not urgent. Nothing in the belt ever was, until the air ran out or the reactor ticked wrong. Arg stood, bare feet on the chilled deck, and braced one hand against the ceiling to stretch out the stiffness. His breath clouded faintly in the dim bridge light. He reached for the overhead controls and tapped the console display. The nav screen buzzed to life. Power usage within threshold. Reactor output nominal. Fuel reserves enough for 38 days. Assuming conservative burns. Life support flickering green. It had been flickering for weeks, a stubborn reminder of old patch jobs and salvaged filters. He reached over to the relay console. A red light blinked softly. New packet received. Delayed comm burst. Burst only. No live channel. Arg slid into the pilot's seat. The chair groaned beneath him. He keyed in the security code, waited for packet decryption to finish. It spat out data like a slow leak. Text logs, news snippets, emergency alerts. Most were corrupted, caught in static or scrambled by drift interference. But enough got through. He read in silence. Station Ring K. Vandalous civil unrest. Multiple sectors under lockdown. Docking permits revoked. 5 fatalities confirmed. Security unable to stabilize outer ring. Airlock breach suspected deliberate. The list circulates. Document fragments still unverified. Leaked names include belt labor officials, former Helix employees, freelance traders. Union voice. We will not tolerate internal rot. List confirmed authentic by interim counsel. Source unknown. Arg's jaw tightened. He leaned forward, eyes flickering over each line again. The phrase interim counsel made something twist in his gut. That was new. The belt didn't have a unified council anymore. Not a real one. After Helix fell, the power fractured. Every station, every cluster, every independent syndicate carved their own slice of authority. Half of them didn't talk to each other, and the other half only talked with weapons. Now suddenly, someone had claimed authority. Interim or not, to confirm a death list? Arg ran a rough hand down his face. He knew what came next. People would start acting like the list was truth, because it was easier than asking who wrote it. Fear always moved faster than facts. The belt wasn't built for doubt. It was built on necessity, on watching each other's backs in the void, because no one else ever would. That was already cracking. He scrolled further, eyes scanning for names. One line stood out. D. Veerdlin, former cargo coordinator, Vandalous Ring. Tag, level 2 collaborator. Archive note, confirmed dealing with Helix prior to collapse. Arg sat back. Veerlin. He remembered the name. Tall, loud, sweat-prone. Smoked too much. Kept 2 data slates in his vest, one for union regs, the other for side jobs. A man who talked fast and dodged harder. But a collaborator? Arg had his doubts. Veerlin had been spineless, yes, opportunistic. But Helix didn't trust people like that. They didn't offer deals. They handed out orders. And if Veerlin had been involved, he'd be dead already. That was how Helix handled leaks. Which meant one of 2 things. Either someone resurrected an old corpse to settle a score, or someone wanted chaos. He looked out the viewport. Registry Rock 142 TAC K tumbled on. The plasma scoring from his last cut still glowed faintly in the dark. Ore rich, worth refining. The work was there, waiting, just like it always was. Arg turned back to the console. He flicked on the recorder, thumb pressing into the dented switch until the red light clicked. This is Arg Arsten. Run log, Dust Widow. Segment 3. Current drift position, outer arc of Ring K. Holding on mining cut. Update timestamp. 3/12/42 standard. He exhaled through his nose. The recording light held steady. Beltcom's still staggered, but I pulled a partial packet from Vandalus Relay. Confirms rumors about the collaborator list. They're calling it authentic. Word is it came from Union interim leadership, though I haven't seen a name attached. No confirmation tags, no chain of proof. He paused, watching the blinking cursor. I've seen some of the belt to know when something doesn't add up. This doesn't add up. Names from 20 years back, tags with no verifications. People I remember drinking with now flagged like war criminals. Another pause. Someone wants the belt to eat itself. He leaned back, let the silence record his breath. That list, it's not just a hit order. It's a message. Somebody's still playing the long game. Maybe someone who used to wear a Helix badge, or maybe someone wearing a new one. He clicked the recorder off. No one would hear the message right away. His channel still auto-uploaded to the drift nets when he passed a relay note, but that might not happen for days. Still, it helped to say it out loud. Arg stood and crossed to the auxiliary monitor, still running passive scan from earlier. A slow-motion blur caught his eye, just outside the Widow's short-range sensor net. A flicker of something moving. Not a rock, not a ghost signal. Too slow, too deliberate. He zoomed, sharp in contrast. A faint thermal balloon hovered beyond the Oort trace art. No transponder, no engine trail. Just there, watching. His gut went cold. He locked the scan in the buffer and sat back in the chair, staring at the dark. The belt was tearing itself apart over a list. And something, or someone, was watching it happen. Chapter 4, Ghost in the Code. Silas Rell hadn't heard another human voice in 641 days. 641 days drifting along the outer rim of the belt, far from every station, every port, every voice that might have reminded him of what he once was, his isolation with both armor and prison. A necessary exile he carved out among the drifting rocks and forgotten outposts where no one looked twice. The place he called home, or what passed for it, was a ramshackle fortress of welded steel and salvage. Panels of rusted hulls from 5 derelict freighters made patchworked walls, some sections barely held together by welded joints and patched plates. The station's skeleton creaked softly with the slow expansion and contraction caused by thermal shifts as it drifted through the cold void. No windows, no open air, just a handful of thick portals of reinforced quartz, smudged with years of dust and solar radiation. He moved deliberately through the narrow central corridor, each step measured and quiet on the grated deck. The cramped space was a clutter of old tech, legacy Helix modules grafted onto stolen Union med bay equipment, tangled data lines snaking like veins along the walls, flickering interface screens displaying cold streams of code and star charts. A dim, sickly yellow emergency light bathed the room, blinking with a slow pulse. The main power was kept minimal, just enough to keep the life support systems humming and the core systems operational. Climate control was non-existent. The recycled air was always stale, tinged faintly with the smell of burnt circuits and machine oil. Silas didn't mind. Comfort was a luxury he'd long since given up. He sank into the worm command chair before the console. His fingers, long and bony, hovered just above the Bourne keys. Pale lights from the display flickered over his weathered face. Sharp cheekbones, deep-set eyes, shadowed by weeks of sleepless nights and constant alertness. Silver-streaked hair pulled tight from his forehead. 641 days. His fingers moved, breaking the silence as he activated the latest data feed from the belt's rigged communication net. These were low bandwidth, encrypted streams filtered through layers of drift buoys and relay satellites. Most days they yielded nothing but static and broken logs. But today, the floodgates had opened. Lines of raw data scrolled across the screens, fragments of emergency alerts, hacked broadcasts, and whispered net conversations pulled from dying networks. Names leaked into the open, flags raised, systems compromised, and always, beneath the noise, the same digital pulse, the collaborator list. He leaned forward, eyes sharp, absorbing every detail. This was no coincidence, no random leak from some disgruntled station worker or rogue hacker. This was an operation with purpose and precision. Silas pulled up the encrypted payload associated with the list, a hidden legacy of Helix infrastructure buried deep in the belt comms system. The code was old, centuries old by digital standards, but meticulously maintained in a ghost repository only a handful had access to. He'd written parts of it, parts he had long wished buried forever. The list wasn't just a document, it was a weapon, a catalyst built to fracture the already fragile trust holding the belt together. He ran diagnostics. The legacy Helix protocols were embedded deep into civilian systems, silent backdoors and command hooks that could be triggered remotely to spread misinformation, sabotage communication, and ignite paranoia. And now, someone had activated them. Silas swallowed hard, his throat dry. The weight of what he'd helped create settled like a stone in his gut. He pulled his eyes away from the screen and looked around the cramped station. The walls seemed to close in a little tighter. The flickering lights cast grotesque shadows over piles of old schematics and rusted components. This was no longer a place to hide. Somewhere out there, the belt was burning in suspicion and fear. Names were being whispered like curses. Old alliances shattered in the blink of an eye. Silas exhaled slowly and reached for a battered satchel resting beside the console. Inside was a relic, a hard-case emergency uplink transmitter, powered down and cold since the last days before Helix's collapse. He checked the power cells. Still good. One name was programmed into the device. One last contact he trusted. Maybe the only man left in the belt who hadn't turned traitor or fled the void. Arg Arsten. Silas had crossed paths with Arg years ago, briefly and quietly, in the chaotic weeks before the Helix War tipped into open conflict. Arg was a quiet man, solid and reliable, the kind of man who keeps his head down and his hands clean, even when the world around him burned. He hadn't heard from Arg since. Silas powered up the uplink, watching as the indicator lights flickered to life. The slow hum of the transmitter was a small rebellion against the silence that had grown around him. The belt was unraveling. The last was only the beginning. He whispered to the empty room, voice dry and ragged. I didn't survive Helix just to watch it rise again. He keyed in the encrypted signal. It would take hours, days, to reach Arg through the drift and degraded relay networks. But it was already too late. The fire had already started. Chapter 5. The Signal That Shouldn't Exist. Arg Arsten sat alone in the dim light of the Dust Widow's bridge, watching the processed ore register blink quietly across his console. The machine's rhythm was steady. 69% yield from the cut on registry rock 142 TAC K with minimal slag. A good haul. The kind that would have made his week 5 years ago. Now, it didn't register. He stirred his tin mug, listening to the spoon scrape inside it. The coffee was stale, boiled thin days ago and reheated more times than he cared to count. The widow's galley was little more than a sealed food unit. A manual water line and a heat coil that worked when it felt like it. But Arg wasn't after comfort. He never had been. He was after silence. He leaned back in the pilot's chair, letting the hum of the reactor lull the edge off his thoughts. On the edge of the belt, far from any lanes or signal-rich sectors, there was peace. Real, brutal, honest peace. The kind men like him earned only through solitude. The kind that never lasted. A soft tone broke the quiet. Ping. Arg sat up slowly. The long-range relay, normally dormant between cycles, lit up with an incoming transmission. It wasn't a data burst or belt-wide alert. It was narrowband, manual, point to point. That was rare. He tapped the control panel and brought up the signal's ID string. The encoding was heavy, deep encryption layered through the last 4 obsolete protocols, and the tag was familiar. Not recent, old. He frowned. A moment passed. Then the ship's speaker crackled. Brief static. Then the machine's synthetic voice. Long-range signal received. No origin cert. Legacy Helix command hooks detected in metadata. Manual key required to unlock transmission. Arg didn't move. Legacy Helix. He hadn't heard that phrase in years. Not in a technical sense. Most belt systems had purged that garbage long ago. The Union had gone on a crusade to wipe every trace of Helix's command structures from civilian systems after the collapse. Yet here it was, lurking in the bones of his relay, whispering old secrets. He stood, slowly, and crossed the narrow bridge to the auxiliary station. Dust gathered at the corners of the screen, undisturbed for weeks. He keyed in the ship's universal decrypt access. The system blinked. One known match. Archive tag contact. Silas Rell. Status: presumed deceased. Arg stared at the name for a long moment. Silas Rell. That wasn't a name he expected to hear again. The man had been a systems architect buried inside Helix's civil networks back before the belt went to war. Quiet type. Always ran cold. Arg had flown beside him in the war. No one saw Silas after the fall. Rumor had it he'd vanished, or been disappeared by one of the post-collapse cleanup crews. Arg reached for the manual override and fed power to the comm buffer. The audio started. Static. Then a whisper of a voice. Raspy, measured, unmistakably human. If you're hearing this, then you're still breathing. It's more than most, Arg. It's Silas. I know it's been years, but if you're still out in the dark, I need you to listen closely. Arg stood still, breath shallow. The message continued. The list that's ripping the belt apart, it's not a leak, it's not a vendetta, it's Helix. Code I helped write, buried in comm systems, dormant until now. Someone activated it. Someone knows exactly what they were doing. Silas's voice cracked, then steadied. It's more than names. It's a behavior trigger designed to shatter trust, destabilize civilian cohesion, and suppress resistance. We called it net break, and it was never supposed to be used. Not like this. I'm sending this to you because you're the last man I know who still does the right thing, even when no one's looking. You don't have to answer. Just don't ignore it. Watch the signals. Follow the pulse. You'll see it for yourself. The message ended. Arg let the silence return. He leaned against the panel, hand pressed to the metal, pulse beating faintly in his throat. Net break. The word didn't sound like a weapon. It sounded like a fault, a crack. He knew how cracks worked. You never saw them from the outside, not at first. They formed deep, invisible. Then one day, the whole bulkhead gave. He opened the diagnostic readout on his relay system. Hidden beneath the routering layers, buried 3 menus deep, was a pattern. Faint, quiet, harmless looking, until you saw it repeating. It matched. Silas was right. It was already in the system. He stood in silence for nearly a minute. The ship hummed around him. Life support ticked quietly. The drill arms powered down with a mechanical shutter. Then he returned to the pilot's chair, sat down, and without a word, he started plotting a course. Not away from the belt, towards it. Chapter 6. Station Collapse Protocol. The hallway outside the blast door was quiet now. Too quiet. Kara Volin crouched low in the half-dark of processing deck 4. One hand wrapped tight around the grip of an old carbon tube pry bar, the other steadying herself against the cold bulkhead wall. Her breath came shallow, fogging in the stagnant air. The last filter cycle had passed without running. Its life support didn't stabilize soon. They'd be on borrowed air. 6 others were still with her, though not for long. The younger cadet, Lena, barely 20, had started muttering to herself in the corner, whispering names under her breath like prayers or confessions. Jace, the runner, was sharpening a broken pipe against the metal deck, eyes hollow. The quartermaster hadn't spoken in over an hour. Fear had taken root in them, the kind that didn't go away. The list had done its job. Kara pressed her ear to the door. No footsteps, no shouting. Just the groan of the station's frame shifting under the strain, and the faintest whine of flickering gravity compensation struggling to stay calibrated. Someone had shut off the primary rotation dampeners. That wasn't an accident. She pushed away from the door and moved back to the others. The older mechanic, Alrin, looked up with tired eyes. "You hear anything?" She shook her head. "No, but the air is getting thinner. Systems are failing." He gave a grim nod. "They're not coming back, are they?" "No," Kara said. "They're not." She glanced at the wall panel. Emergency override code was still intact, but the lines were glitching, error symbols pulsing at uneven intervals. Manual command had been compromised or overridden by someone outside the deck. Maybe it was sabotage. Maybe it was that damned code, net break. She'd heard someone call it over the whisper net before the station feeds went dead. It didn't matter. The station was dying. "What's your call?" Jace asked, not looking up from his pipe. "We need to get off this deck," Kara said, keeping her voice calm. "Escape pods, lifeboats, anything that's still powered. We can't stay here. Oxygen won't last. If the integrity sensors are glitching, this deck could vent." Lena whimpered quietly. Kara didn't look at her. No one had time for fear anymore. Only actions. Alrin spoke again, voice soft but firm. "You think that list is real?" Kara's jaw clenched. "Does it matter?" "It did to them." Kara looked him in the eye. "It was a spark, that's all. Someone threw it into dry brush and walked away. Real or fake, people believed it. That's all it took." A heavy silence followed. She let it sit, let them feel it. Then she moved to the wall panel and keyed in a manual bypass. The controls buzzed, denied access. Bugs again. On the third attempt, a small green line appeared. Deck seal disengaged. She looked back. "Stay quiet. We move together. If we run into hostiles, we don't engage unless we have no choice." Jace stood and nodded. Lena hesitated, then followed. The door slid open. Beyond it, the hallway was scarred with soot and carbon scoring. A fire had swept through earlier, likely triggered by a power relay overload. Too many terminals trying to transmit falsified security data all at once. Drossen had been a clean station once. Now it looked like the inside of a ruptured vein. They moved carefully. Bodies lay still in the corridor. Some were burned, others left crumpled where they'd fallen. Kara didn't let herself look long. Recognition wouldn't help now. She led the group around the worst of the damage, stepping over debris and broken piping. At the main junction, a bulkhead had been sealed with welding foam. Someone had barricaded themselves in. Whether they were alive on the other side was anyone's guess. As they neared the core shaft ladder, the lights flickered again. This time, they didn't come back. Darkness closed in like a fist. Alrin activated a glow baton. The chemical light flared green, casting the group in a sickly hue. "Keep moving," Kara said. The shaft was narrow, but the ladder was intact. She climbed it first, testing each run. At the top, she paused and pressed her ear to the maintenance door. She heard breathing. Then faintly, a voice. A man's voice, speaking low, repeating something. "Not on the list. Not on the list. I didn't help them." Kara froze. Another survivor, or someone else. She keyed her comm. "Voice contact on the next deck. Sounds unstable." Chase came through behind her, breathing hard. Go around? No time, she whispered. He might know it still works. We take it slow. She unlatched the maintenance door and pushed it open a crack. The figure stood with his back to her, middle-aged, gray uniform singed and torn. His hands were red with blood, not his. He held a handheld slate, cracked and sparking. The list was still glowing on the screen. He turned, eyes wide, and screamed. You're on it! I saw you! I saw! Kara moved fast. She shoved him up against the wall, disarmed him, and pinned his arm behind his back before he could reach for a side tool. He writhed, spit flying from his mouth. I'm not on any list, she growled into his ear. And if I was, it wouldn't mean anything. You were in procurement, he spat. What makes you one of them? I was a logistics officer, she snapped. And that list, it's poison. Someone wants us to kill each other. That's the real op. He sagged suddenly. All the fight drained from him in a single breath. Doesn't matter anymore, he whispered. The station's falling apart. Control's gone. No one's coming. Kara released him and stepped back. Then get moving. If you stay here, you'll die with it. She turned to the others. We keep heading up. Escape pods are 2 decks above. If any are left, we take them. If not, we find another way. No one argued. They moved on, leaving the man behind, whispering to himself in the dark. As they climbed, Kara glanced over her shoulder at the ruined deck below. The belt wasn't safe anymore, not even inside steel. Whatever was happening, whatever was coming, it wasn't just code. It was a war starting all over again. Only this time, no one would know who they were fighting. Chapter 7. Course Correction. Arg Arsten sat in a pilot's chair, arms folded, watching the nav screen as his course adjusted by degrees. The Dust Widow hummed beneath him, steady and patient. Her aging thrusters groaned when realignment kicked in, but they held true. Every correction was a whisper of mass against the void. No wasted fuel, no sudden burns. Just quiet motion, like he preferred. Until now. His hands moved across the flight interface, confirming autopilot sync, burn schedule, and proximity scans. The asteroid field he'd worked for the last few weeks, tag grid 142 TAC-K, was already slipping behind him, the speckled field growing more distant with every pulse of the engine. That was the first thing to go. The routine. He stared at the starfield ahead, then down at the secured slate on the console. It held the message from Silas, locked and copied for review, even though he hadn't played it again since that first listen. He didn't need to. The words were carved in. It's not just a list. It's a weapon, a trigger. I helped write it, but someone else activated it. Arg closed his eyes, let the silence press in. He'd spent years mining rocks on the edge of the void, outside the chatter of politics, beyond the blood-slecked squabbles of stations and corps. The war had ended. Helix had fallen. The Union had risen, clumsy, bureaucratic, but better than what had come before. So he thought. But Silas's warning had cracked something deeper. The list wasn't a leak. It was deliberate, surgical. Someone was using it to break the belt from the inside, not to win anything, just to fracture it. Arg didn't care about politics. He didn't care about who's in charge. He cared about the truth. And the truth didn't smell right this time. He pushed off from the pilot's chair and drifted through the bridge, boots finding quiet purchase with each magnetic step. The Dust Widow was dim, the overhead lights set to low save for the system grid along the side of the wall. He liked the dark. It was honest. Honest things don't lie to you in bright rooms. He reached the secondary console, pulled up long-range signals and keyed through the most recent drift traffic. Most of it was belt standard. Cargo run updates, trader logs, station manifests, then fragments of more broken messages. Alrin's dead. Can't tell who fired first. It burned the med bay. People inside. The names are real. Damn it! My own brother. The logs were raw, untrimmed, not claimed by any Union relay. These were panic bursts, sent when things started to fall apart. Arg felt the weight in his chest grow heavier. He'd seen this before, early in the war when Helix Station governors turned on their own, when someone threw out a word like traitor and bullets came before questions. That kind of madness didn't come from lies. It came from belief. And that meant someone had made them believe. He looked at the nav screen. One of the stronger mid-belt relays blinked in red. Drosan Station, Kara's outpost. He hadn't talked to her in years. She was solid. Former tech. One of the few who could argue both sides of any belt council meeting and still walk away with respect. She wouldn't survive what the list was doing. Not if it spread that far. He checked the nav path. The Dust Widow had already accelerated past the point of no return. The course to Drosan was locked unless he wanted to waste fuel and time. He didn't. He moved to the cargo bay next. The hallway felt smaller somehow. The air colder. Not fear, not exactly. Anticipation. The kind that prickled at the base of his neck. He passed the wall-mounted suit rack. His work gear hung in still silence. Gray mining EVA armor, streaked with age and resin, still stained along the sleeves. He hadn't worn anything else in almost a decade. But for this trip, he pulled down the side compartment and retrieved an older suit. Dark, carbon-layered plates, sealed helmet, light combat padding. A gift from a war he didn't ask to survive. He laid it out and began the checks. No ceremony, no ritual, just routine. There was no place for regret in vacuum. He paused once, only once, when he reached the personal locker on the upper rack. Inside, wrapped in soft cloth, was a recorder. Small, simple. A backup from the days when his Void Miner channel still aired regularly. He hadn't used it since the belt went quiet, since the only watchers were ghosts. He stared at it for a long second, then powered it on. The green light blinked. He didn't even look into the lens. He just spoke. Dust Widow log, Arg Arsten. No episode number. This one's off the record. If anyone finds this, I'm en route to Drosan. Relay signals suggest it's compromised. Got a name from the past. Silas Rell. Says the list wasn't a leak. Says it was a trigger. Helix code. I don't know what I'm walking into, but I know how fast trust burns in vacuum. I've seen it. And if he's right, this list, this net break, won't just burn a few stations. It'll break the spine of the whole belt. If I don't make it back, don't bother making me a hero. I'm not. I'm just a miner, and I'm tired of running from the smoke. He clicked off the recorder. Silence returned. He stood a moment longer in the stillness of the Widow, hands resting on the steel bulkhead. Then he turned back towards the bridge, suit in hand. Drosan was 2 hours out. Time enough to get ready. Not for a fight, but for the truth. Chapter 8. Dust on the Dock. The Dust Widow dropped out of thrust like an old breath caught in the lungs. Arg Arsten sat silent in the pilot's chair, eyes locked on the station ahead. A slowly rotating husk of steel and shadow. Drosan Station. She looked worse than the last time he'd passed her, back when the Union was still licking its wounds and cargo still flowed through her spine. Now she looked like she'd been left out on a storm and forgotten. The outer ring was uneven in its turn, drifting a half-degree off-axis. 3 of the structural lights blinked erratically, no pattern. The central dock shaft was venting mist, a coolant bleed or something worse. Debris floated just off her upper maintenance arm. Not wreckage, not yet, but the kind of loose clutter that meant protocols had broken down. That was the first sign something was wrong. The second was silence. Arg keyed open the comms channel, voice steady. Drosan Station, this is civilian hauler Dust Widow. Broadcasting Union clearance, code 42 TAC Baker, on approach vector. Request dock lock and guidance. Please advise. Nothing. Just hiss and static. He waited 20 seconds, then repeated. Adjusted frequency. Ran a secondary ping. Still nothing. The docking guidance system wasn't just quiet. It was gone. No handshake, no ping back. The entire auto berth net had either shut down or been intentionally disabled. Arg's brows furrowed as he brought up the long-range scan overlay. Drosan's beacon was flickering in low pulse. Not down, but degraded. Something in the station's mainframe had gone bad. A power failure? Sabotage? Or just the chaos spreading? The belt had been unraveling faster than anyone expected. And this floating grave, was proof. He took manual controls over the Widow's flight system. The old ship responded with a deep groan. Its attitude thrusters fired an adjusted vector. She wasn't fast, but she was obedient. Arg had kept her that way. Fine, he muttered, fingers dancing over the interface. We do it the old way. He guided the Widow in, low and slow, curling her under the southern arm of Drosan's outer ring. The station's belly loomed larger, scarred plating scorched hull joints, markings covered by soot and impact slag. Docking bay's B's outer doors were half open. The servo arms twitched, hesitated, then reluctantly slid the doors wide like a drunk waking up in a thunderstorm. Welcoming committee's late, Arg muttered, not amused. He nudged the Widow inside. The hangar bay was dark. Arg toggled the external floodlights. The beam cut through drifting vapor, illuminating the bulk of the docking chamber. One derelict cargo hauler was parked at the near angle on the far wall, long dead. Scorch marks ringed the blasted shield. The loading platform had deep gouges carved through the floor, plating like someone had used a torch cutter to seal off escape points. That was new. He extended the landing clamps. The ship thudded into place with a magnetized shutter. Then silence. He didn't move for a moment, just sat there, staring at the dead dock, listening to the Widow's quiet systems ticking down from flight mode. Finally, he stood. No ceremony, just habit. He crossed to the suit locker, pulled down his old carbon-layered EVA rig. It slid over him with the comfort of years. He buckled the chest plate, sealed the boots, and clipped his helmet onto the mag ring on his belt. Not sealed, yet. He didn't want to start breathing air he didn't need to. The side pouch held his toolkit. Cutter, pry bar, diagnostic wand, left hip. Right hip, an old baton, shock capable. Not standard mining issue, but standard enough for where he was headed. He keyed the outer lock and let the Dust Widow breathe. The ramp hissed open. The stale air from the hangar bay met his face like a forgotten tomb. He stepped out. The deck beneath his boots was sticky, residue from a fire suppressant or maybe decomposing coolant. It left faint, dark trails under his steps as he walked. Every footfall echoed louder than it should have. The overhead lights flickered twice, then gave up entirely. He clicked on his shoulder lamp. A narrow cone of white light pierced the dark ahead. The bodies began 12 meters in. 2 of them, station workers by the look, burnt uniforms slumped against a bulkhead. One had a deep gash across the ribs. The other had no visible wounds at all, just wide glassy eyes and blue around the lips. Low atmo failure. Arg crouched by the second one, checked the pulse. Foolish, he knew. Cold. Long gone. He stood again, slowly, jaw tight. Drosan hadn't gone quietly. He moved forward, one corridor at a time. The deeper he went, the worse it got. In Section 2B, the ceiling was cracked. Support rails bent upward like something had exploded beneath the floor. The panels were spray-painted in wide, crude letters. They were always watching. In 3C, a barricade of overturned carts and scorched foam blocks blocked the main lift. Bullet marks dotted the far wall. A standoff, maybe 2 groups, maybe more. On one of the panels, he found names scratched into the metal, dozens of them. Some he recognized from old manifests. Beside each one, a slash mark, and the words, confirmed. He knew what that meant. The list. NetBreak had made it here. He pressed forward until he found a working terminal. It took some coaxing, his own diagnostic tool patched into a side support, bypassing the corrupted OS. Finally, logs bloomed across the cracked screen. He read, Caravolin, Level D access override, Escape Bay 6, activated. Manual launch confirmed, 5 occupants. Signal beacon active, drift vector plotted. His hands gripped the edge of the terminal until the steel flexed. She'd made it out. Kara. He didn't know who else was with her, but the escape pods weren't automated. If she'd gotten 5 out, she was still thinking, still planning, still fighting. Arg stepped back from the console, heart steady again. He'd come here looking for confirmation. Silas's warning had pointed towards Drossen, and Drossen had answered. But now the job had changed. This wasn't about scavenging truth. This was about following the last people still trying to survive it. He turned back towards the widow. The corridor behind him looked darker now. He didn't need to check the other decks. He'd seen enough. As he walked, his boot caught a fragment of metal. He bent down. A nameplate torn from a jumpsuit. R. Salvek, Communications. He stared at it for a long moment, just a strip of metal and cloth, then tucked it into his belt pouch without a word. The Dust Widow welcomed him back with a quiet sigh. He sealed the airlock behind him and shut the outer layer of his suit. Then back up in the pilot's chair, he brought up the pod's tracking beacon. It was faint, but moving. Drifting outward. Survivors heading for nowhere. He adjusted course and throttled up the engines. The belt was breaking, but some pieces were still worth chasing. He wasn't ready to let go of them yet. Chapter 9. Signal Ghosts. The Dust Widow surged gently forward, a soft hum vibrating through her steel bones. Arg sat hunched in the pilot's chair, one hand on the throttle, the other thumbing through layers of old tracking code. He'd re-angled her burn to intercept the pod's projected drift path, but every kilometer took him further from the belt's wounded spine, past places he hadn't flown in years, places he thought were safe to forget. The pod's signal pulsed on the scanner, weak, steady, unencrypted. Old belt tech, reliable in a way that newer Union beacons weren't. It gave location, but no ID. Whoever was inside hadn't or couldn't activate the two-way. That was its own kind of answer. Ark kept the widow at half thrust. No need to rush. No reason to burn hotter than he had to. The belt didn't reward speed. It rewarded patience, silence, and a deep respect for distance. Outside, the stars wheeled slow and cold. Between them drifted the scattered bones of abandoned ore crawlers, scrapped comm HUDs, and stations that hadn't been serviced since Helix fell. The region ahead had once been known as the Mid-Lane Fringe. Miners used to laugh and call it the Rust Church because everything here had once served a purpose and been left behind like old faith. Now it just looked haunted. Arg keyed in a range overlay. The pod was close, less than 100 clicks out, still moving on inertia alone. It had taken no power since launch. Either its main grid was dead, or whoever was inside was just conserving every joule. He adjusted the widow's heading and began a slow sweep. "Come on," he muttered. "Still be breathing." The nav screen blinked, then pinged a new proximity echo. Reflected signal scatter, not from the pod. From something larger, slower, shadowed. Arg frowned and switched to thermal overlay. A cold signature sat 2 clicks off the pod's trajectory. Too cold for a ship with active systems, but not cold enough to be dead. He tapped the console. "What are you?" The AI didn't respond, not because it couldn't, because Arg had long ago disabled the ship's conversational subroutines. He preferred his silence honest. The widow closed the distance in low thrust. Arg watched the screen as the ship resolved. An old Helix tug. Designation almost scrubbed from its hull. Burn scars along the belly, puncture holes in the side plating, no visible ID. But its comm dish was intact. He narrowed his eyes. That wasn't a coincidence. The tug had once been a message runner, a node ship. Its only purpose was to bounce and relay signals across the belt station. And here it was, drifting with a dead pod, like a shadow following a scream. He brought the Widow in slow, careful not to trigger any active proximity alarms. The tug didn't move. The signal from the pod wasn't coming directly from the pod. It was bouncing through the tug. He stared at the screen, heart thudding once. Gods below. It was bait. Someone had patched the pod's distress signal into the tug's dish. Someone wanted the signal to look like a survivor call, but the relay was artificial, modified. The pod might still be real, but someone had made sure it got noticed. Arg cut the engines. The Widow drifted in silence. He sat still for a full minute. This could mean one of two things. Either Kara had jury-rigged the pod's beacon to scream louder, trying to be found, or someone else had set the beacon to draw ships in. Ships like mine. He reached slowly for the recorder and keyed it on. Void miner log. No episode number. Intercepted a escape pod beacon near Fringe Drift sector. Trace signal through a Helix-era relay tug. Cold shell, not dead. Modified broadcast. Could be survivors, could be bait. Proceeding with caution. Pause. Feels like a memory. War games. Helix tactics. Signal relays used to draw in scavengers, rescue crews. Targeted kills. The kind of quiet traps people forget were ever legal. Longer pause. Still going, because someone might be alive in there. And that's the only part that matters. He clicked the recorder off. His hands hovered above the thruster toggle, not for retreat, for approach, but not towards the tug. He aimed toward the pod, angling in from below, using the Widow's underslung dock to come up clean and invisible to anything watching above. 50 clicks, 30, 15. At 5 clicks, he shut the Widow down to full drift. The silence grew louder in his ears. Then the pod came into view. Small, scorched, marked with Kara's old procurement tag. Hull still intact, no life sign showing. He cursed under his breath, but he didn't back away. Not yet. The Widow's main grapple extended. Arg rotated her belly towards the pod, aligned the docking teeth, and engaged the clamps. The arm hissed. Lock confirmed. He stood, crossed the bridge, and grabbed his gear. Suit already half on. He sealed the helmet, cycled air, and activated the shoulder torch. Then he moved to the airlock. The pod waited outside. One answer or a dozen more questions. He keyed the hatch and stepped out. The end of Part 1 of Ashes of Helix, Void Miner.